everybody, and welcome back to Hoffman Reproductions. Thank you for joining in with us again today. This is going to be part 2 of our Scottish Dirk build. And with the work we did last time around, we're ready to zero in on our handle as far as the shaping goes. As you can see here, I've got the section of wood that we'll be using for our Dirk handle, which I'll go into detail about this particular piece in a minute. Historically, the woods used for Scottish Dirks differ from that which you think they might be. Nowadays, you tend to think of a lot of ebony and black woods being used. Those were used on Scottish Dirks, but much later in the time period. Not till you get into the 1800s and 1900s do you start seeing those wood types show up more. Prior to that, again, early 1700s, mid 1700s, you see walnut being used. That pops up from time to time on originals. Different types of oak have been seen for handles. It's been speculated, and I say speculated because some of these original Scottish Dirks that reside in museums, the patina is so heavy on them, it's almost impossible to tell what they are. But just, various wood experts that have looked at them have wagered some opinions and thoughts on them. Anywho, boxwood, briarwood is another wood that is thought to have been used, and there's even some oddball ones in there, like certain type of an evergreen or pine tree. Some people have speculated was used occasionally. So it's kind of a broad range of woods, but the woods that you see on the real fancy gaudy Dirks from the 18 and 1900s being made of ebony and other black African woods, those weren't used until much later in the time period. The type of wood that I generally build mine out of is cherry. Now, cherry is not a type of wood maybe initially you might think of would have been used, but as I said, there were a lot of different varieties that were used originally, and cherry, believe it or not, is one type of wood that grows in Scotland. I went on a wood database and found that a type of cherry actually does grow in Scotland and is native to there. So for that reason and others, it carves and shapes well. I've settled on cherry as what I generally use. So the piece that I've got here, just in case you're wondering, and it's a good rule of thumb as far as the dimensions of this piece, it'll allow you to build most types and shapes of Dirks. This one is about 6 inches in length, and then on the width it's about 2 by 2. That will give you plenty of meat that you can work the Dirk down. It will accommodate 99% of your Dirk shapes. It'd be pretty rare that this wouldn't fit these dimensions, any and all of the historic Dirks that exist today. So to shape it, I typically, to get my rough dimensions, you can't do all your shaping there, but I will chuck this in a lathe. You can see I've center pointed each side. I will chuck this up in a lathe and do my initial shaping, which I'll demonstrate. If you don't have a lathe, and this is probably the way most of them were done, not all, but some would have been done by hand just using various chisels and rasps, you can work it down that way, except it takes much longer. So lathe is much more efficient. So I'll go ahead and get it chucked up in the lathe and show you how I go about that process. Okay, so I've got our handle chucked up in the lathe here. I have just a simple little hobby lathe that I picked up at Harbor Freight a while ago. It's an 8x12, 110 volt, and it's simple, small, but for this type of job, knife handle work and whatnot, it works really good. So for me, it was a good choice. But as I said, this is chucked up in the lathe. I've knocked the corners of the shoulders off. It helps it turn just a little easier on the lathe. To begin, I'm just going to turn this blank symmetrical and round. Now, the first measurement that you want to do is you want to decide how wide you want your pommel to be, the back portion of the Dirk where the back of your hand would lock in. That's going to dictate how the rest of this will go. So on this particular Dirk, the measurement I went with, and again, you can get measurements from originals and a lot of reference books, or just eyeball it if you want. but it's fairly wide. I've got this set of calibers laid out to what I want. It's about 1 3/4 on the base. So to begin, I'm just going to turn it to that dimension. And also I'm wearing a full face shield, which is a good idea with a lathe, and I've got just a few basic tools here, some gouges and flat chisels and things. Not a huge array that will help me turn this on down. So turn it round, and to that 1 3/4 measurements, first thing we're going to do. Alright, so I've just about got it round. I'm going to continue working it on down round until I meet that 1 3/4 on the pommel end. Alright, so I've got the proportions of the Dirk where I want it to match the pommel width. I'm not going to try and explain all of these lines. These are just little details that I need to be aware of when turning this Dirk down. Every single Dirk is different, so the way you lay it out is going to be slightly different, but just a few things to bear in mind, and that is where you want to have your pommel. That is the thickness of the entire thing when you start turning this down. So in other words, you don't want to turn the whole thing down to match the width of the middle, because you do that on a Dirk, the base is supposed to flare way outward. You're going to be way short. So everything is dictated by this measurement here, which again is about 1 3/4. The overall length of a Scottish Dirk handle, they are typically 4 to 4.5 inches. Now if you want to stay historically correct, stay within those parameters. If you go over that, they didn't really exist. And the way a Scottish Dirk works is your whole hand covers the majority or not all of the handle. Some people think, you know, your hand rides below the haunches. It doesn't. More or less your hand completely covers it, and it just kind of molds into it, and they're actually quite comfortable. So relatively short by today's standards. Keep that pommel width measurement in mind. And also from here to here, this is where the haunches on this particular Dirk are going to start. In other words, where the base of the blade meets this handle. This line is the overall length, 4.5 inches. This measurement on the width across here needs to be a little wider than the base of your blade. So as your blade flares, let's say it's 1.5 inches, well, you want this to be about 1 5/8 inches, so you have a little meat on each side. Most Scottish Dirks, as the blade fits down into the handle, are more or less level with the sides as it fits in. I'll show it as we go on, but that's another measurement to be aware of. So when laying these things out, there's several different ways that you can do it. One, you can go ahead and sketch your design out, and when you're happy with the sketch, transfer that over to your handle material. You can make a lot of detailed measurements and lay it out on your handle that way, or you can just have a picture and just do it by eye. Makers that do this nowadays use all three of those methods. It's whatever you're most comfortable with. I'm working off of a photograph here. I do have some basic dimensions that the description gives on this original, but I'll just be doing a lot of checking as I go. But this is the photograph that I'm more or less going to be working with as I turn this down. So to begin, I'm going to focus on the pommel and go from there. Alright, so I finished the rough turning of this. All those little lines that I had on it earlier, you can see are these nice little decorative areas on here now. Certain places on this early Dirk are going to get carved and certain places are not. Again, you just have to stick with and do the best you can on your layout for the particular Dirk you're starting to create here. On the haunch portion here, two sides of this are going to be flat and slightly radius. Okay, we don't leave it in this circular form. Where it meets the handle is going to flow back in here. I'll demonstrate here in a little while how I'll shape that out or show the finished product. But I'm going to go ahead and final trim this top portion here, get it close to being ready to get cut off from the lathe. But this is going to be our haunch area again. So that's more or less what I was going for in the approximate final dimensions. I'll probably work down just a little bit with a file and some sandpaper, but this has got it close, and again it saves a lot of time as opposed to doing all that file work by hand. So we're ready for the next step. Alrighty, so we've got our rough turning pretty much where I want it to be at this stage. Again, every Dirk is different. You'll have to just pay close attention to your drawing or original photographs and get your layout correct. But this is what I was going for. For the original, I'm replicating. I've got some center marks here just to help me. We have to remove the mass on this now. As you can see, this top portion of where the haunches or shoulders will be is round. Two sides of this need to be flat, and I'm going to use the 2x72 grinder to rough that on down. So go ahead and take care of that step next. Whoa. Alright, so you can see I've tapered that in. It needs to be more finely refined at this stage. It's a little uneven, so I'm going to go ahead and do that off camera. But anyway, you're going to make two sides flat and have it tapered in, so in other words flaring out. And then on the cross section, this is going to kind of get, as it gets back in this area here, radiused around. But again, every Dirk's different, so you just have to pay attention to the original that you're replicating and shoot for that. Okay, so here the handle is roughed out on the cross section now. You can see up here near the top portion and see the basic shape I'm going for on this one. Also, I might add, you can notice there's a crescent shape to the handle now. That matches the blade. Most Scottish Dirks have that crescent shape where the blade meets the handle, and both the blade and the handle have that shape to fit together properly. Some of them are more pronounced than others. This one's somewhat slight. I'll be refining this whole thing as I go on before I call it final finish and ready for carving. But this is the basic shape that you can see I'm going for in this one. To achieve this crescent shape, I just take the contact wheel on my sander and, being careful, gently put it on there, and it'll put a radius on it. But you can also use a wood rasp, a half round wood rasp, to take that down. You want to be careful when pushing with a file that you don't blow pieces of wood out your edge here and destroy that, so be careful. But at this stage we're ready to go ahead and get our hole drilled through the handle and fit it onto our blade. That'll be next.